what's your reason to exist, and what do you stand for, and how are you going to communicate to people, and where are you going to communicate to them? So, point of difference to what's out there already, because why should I, as a person buying into buy your brand over someone else's brand? So you need to have a stance, whatever that stance is.
Some people build their careers by following the rules, and some build them by asking why the rules existed in the first place. Our guest today has spent nearly 2 decades inside FMCG world, from global giants to bold startups, learning what works, what doesn't, and what the industry still manages to get spectacularly wrong. He's now charting a very different path. Welcome to the podcast, Ben.
Thank you, Ian. It's great to be here.
No
Just on your
worries.
comment there about the rules, I'm a firm believer that rules are guidelines and they're to be broken at the right time.
At the right time.
At the right time, yeah.
Brilliant. Let's wind back. Let's just touch what first pulled you into the world of FMCG. Was it a sort of a giant plan, or just an opportunity that you saw?
No, I think like most people, you fall into unless it's a particular passion that you've got from a very young age, you kind of fall into a career. And for me, it was no different. I fell into fast-moving consumer goods, or FMCG industry. I was actually originally playing hockey at a pretty reasonable standard for years, and as part of trying to do that, I went and worked at a brand agency initially to sort of supplement and complement my kind of athlete career. And one of the brands that I worked on at that point in time was a brand called Relentless, which was owned by Coca-Cola. So I was working on this brand, and it was my first kind of experience of big corporate FMCG beverage brands. At the sort of the back end of working for that agency, they actually asked me if I'd be interested in joining Coca-Cola. So that was one of my first initial experiences. I got this fantastic opportunity off the back of sort of the sport that I was playing to go and join a big corporate like Coca-Cola, and that's how it all started.
And what sort of surprised you in those early days? Because sometimes we can sort of see those big brands and they look very good from the outside, but inside sometimes it's a completely different story or a different viewpoint.
Yeah, I think what surprised me, they're just such well-oiled machines, big corporates. You take a global brand of business like Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola is actually split into 2 different component parts. You've got the Coca-Cola Company, which head office is in Atlanta, and they own the syrups, the rights to the brands. And then you have different bottlers around the world, which is how they expanded globally. So those are people that basically make, sell, and distribute the Coca-Cola products. So they buy the rights to then distribute them. So the Coca-Cola business that I worked for was basically UK and GB. They've now actually expanded, and I think they own part of the German market in Asia, Australasia, and things like that as well. But the reason it surprised me, because I just thought Coca-Cola, it's just that's them. Actually, that's not how they worked. It was someone that owned the brands, and then someone that owned the rights to make, sell, and distribute in certain markets and regions. But they're just so well oiled as a big corporate, from supply chain, manufacturing, procurement. How they're organisationally set up. Profitability. I mean, you name it, they are very well drilled, which is what I guess you have to be to grow globally at the pace that they did. I think when I joined, they're about 125 years old. So quite a legacy brand at that point, and obviously continue to be a legacy brand that is loved by lots of people still to this day. Also probably disliked by lots of people to this day as well.
Yeah, definitely. And then what were some of the least glamorous or most character building moments in those first early roles that you had?
I think it's like the hard graft. You've got zero reputation. You haven't got any kind of results or performance behind what you've done. So you're trying to build those things. For me, it was all about, I guess it probably comes from being like a type A kind of competitive athlete. It was like, okay, well, I'll try and do everything to my best ability as quickly as I possibly can, and set goals that are either kind of sort of stretching or, sort of realistic, but with a stretch in mind. I think that probably, put me in pretty good stead. There was definitely some odd moments. I think, I'd spent about 5.5 years at Coca-Cola in the end, which was brilliant. I absolutely loved my time there and can't speak highly enough of it. But I remember someone telling me at the time that I had a big beard, and I remember someone telling me that my beard would be quite career limiting. So I was like, well, I won't head down this discrimination route, obviously, but being a white middle class male. But I was like, it amazed me that people were still concerned about kind of looks and appearances. I've got quite a lot of tattoos all over me now and things like that, and that was sort of frowned upon in those days as well. Whereas I think the world has changed and sort of celebrates individuality and cultural differences, and I think that's a good thing. But it did surprise me back in I don't know, 2010 or whenever it was, quite a few years ago, that someone was commenting on someone else's appearance. I was a bit like, yeah, bit odd.
Yeah, very, very hard.
Needless to say, I kept the beard, totally ignored the rules, and I was like, yeah, I'm still going to be me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Brilliant. And that's again when you open with guidelines, the rules are the guidelines. Break them when it allows to, or for the benefit of the greater good, as they would say.
totally. Yeah, for sure.
And pushing hard in your early part of your career, you mentioned sort of a bit of burnout and stuff like that. What was that sort of chapter like for you, and what was going on in your life? Was it just purely work related? Was it stuff behind the scenes as well?
Yeah, I think burnout it's a really interesting topic. I think for me, young family, so trying to raise children. I was playing international sport at the time and trying to build a career, and those are three quite big sort of pillars of anyone's life. And financially it'd been quite difficult. So in my early stage career, I was quite motivated by money, because when you've got a young family, you're trying to earn money to look after them. And I'm sure all the mums and dads out there that will resonate with, unless you come from a very affluent background. But even if you do, I suspect those people, they work incredibly hard as well. So you're trying to balance, juggle all of these things. And um, I think that, over time, the scary thing about burnout is it catches you out. So you can be operating at sort of such a rate and a level and trying to be present in whatever you're doing, whether, it's being a dad or focusing on career or focusing on, your sport or your hobbies, activity, whatever it is. But if you're constantly running it, 110, fairly, and your cortisol levels can be quite high depending on the stress that you're facing. It's a gradual build up over time. I think burnout is quite a scary thing because it happens when you least expect it. And I've definitely experienced it a couple of times in my career, and can be quite debilitating. You can be really, brain fog, fatigue, exhaustion, loss of motivation. There's some quite negative experiences that you can get from it, and relationships can break down. But you obviously, life still continues, so you have to find a way to kind of rebalance, rebuild, take the time to still get the enjoyment and the fun back for the things that give you energy, whilst you're actually giving energy to other places. But quite a complex thing, and I think unless you've been through that experience, you don't know how to manage it and cope with those things. Also, if you're not educated, like I had no idea, what it was. I was just like, yeah, I'll plow on. I can do this. Yeah, I can take on more. Yeah, I can take on, and then suddenly, it can hit you, and it's a really tricky thing once you've got there to then start shifting the balance and rebuilding things as well. And I think lots of entrepreneurs, business owners, people trying to progress in whatever their industry, there's a reason why people say, like, take time to do things that give you energy. Sleep is so important. Yeah, 8 hours of sleep and being hydrated, because north of 70% of people aren't hydrated every day. So trying to make sure you look after sort of your body and your mind, because those two things are interlinked. And ensure that you don't get to that place, because ultimately, if you're not resting, you can't perform at the level that you want to anyway. So, and if you hit burnout, you then aren't performing at a level that you want to, or that you're capable of previously. So it's a tricky thing to go through, and I think there's still a bit of a stigma associated with it. And I think the reality is there's quite a high expectation on people to deliver quite a lot, and that pressure at times forces people to do the above and beyond piece that can actually be detrimental to personal, physical, and mental health. So I think taking ownership and control of that, and really trying to make sure you're doing things that are good for you, and still delivering what you want to, a rate you want to, but just being a bit more balanced with what you do. Some pretty big lessons in there, and obviously didn't learn it first time, because I had it the second time. So, like, all great things. You don't always learn the first time. Sometimes it takes like a couple of times to get those learnings. And then, for me, it was very much about, yeah, just trying to take those learnings and just factor them into the day to day, really, which isn't always easy. And I think personally, I think there's a bit of a myth on balance and work-life balance. I think it's more about, being present in what you're doing is quite important, and just recognizing that it's not a kind of a linear, always even balance. Actually, things will topple and change at different points in time. So you need to be a bit more fluid and flexible, but just still make sure you're looking after yourself. You can't be unbalanced for too long, either direction. So, yeah.
And I dare I say it's almost like a drip effect. If you're still on full steam of where you want to go at 110%, you don't sometimes realize you've got a small leak out the back and you're not replenishing it enough and you're burning it up, type of thing. And like you say, you might just start with a bit of brain fog, or, oh, I'm not feeling very motivated. this week, or I've not quite achieved that target, I'll push a bit more because that's going to get you the kudos within the business or keep your job in some cases like that. So there's probably lots of multifaceted things just on the career front, let alone a small family and let alone a sporting life as well.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. And listen, I've made those mistakes and learned those lessons, and I'm sure there's plenty of other people that maybe if they listen to this and they're thinking about balance and the hours that they're working, or being present with their families or friends, or doing the things that give them energy. I just think it's so important to try and just have that self-awareness to then just try and incorporate it into your working life and your personal life as well. Because if you're unaware and you're going through those things, I think that's where the drip effect happens, and it just catches you out before you know it. You're kind of, the fluid's gone and you need to replenish it. But the only way to replenish it is have a break, have a full stop, and you have to build up that recharge that battery again, and then go again, which ultimately is not often people can just fully stop, and because people have got mortgages to pay and mouths to feed and roofs to put over their head and all of those wonderful things that we do on a daily basis.
Yeah, and what would be sort of one of the tips that you've learned now if somebody's listening thinking, sounds a little bit like me, but I'm not going to get burnout and stuff like that. What do you reckon one simple tip could be for somebody listening that might have been in the career path that you were on?
Yeah, sleep is, I think, the single most important thing, which is hard because if you're stressed, tired, working long hours, trying to balance different things in your life, often your brain is quite busy. So then when it comes to the restoring your body and recuperating, it can actually reduce down the amount of sleep that you need. But I think, there's so much science-backed evidence around sleep being critical for recovery to be able to perform. So I think if you can get your sleep routine and pattern right, I think it's really important. So regular time to bed, regular time to get up, and when you do get up in the morning, a regular exercise routine to kickstart the day. I think that, those two things combined, along with drinking plenty of fluids, I think it's just that, and it's really obvious, really simple things, but I think they're really important. Combine that with reducing alcohol content, prioritizing what you do, just being really kind of focused with your time is really important. Otherwise, people with burnout can do things like get distracted, work on multiple things at the same time. You'd never quite complete things that you want to, and it can be quite detrimental because then that builds and adds to the pressure, over time. And when you're in building a career in high performing roles, or you've got to sort of managing director, chief executive roles, and the types of roles that I've done in the past, you have to perform consistently. Like there is no room not to perform, so you need to be performing in those roles. Yeah, sleep, hydration, good routines. I think those things, simple things that can help.
Yeah. And what was it like? Say you mentioned some of the high pressure roles that you had there. Was there a moment in there that you realised there might have been some people leading you where you realised you knew more about the business than perhaps they did?
Yeah, I think so. Listen, one of my recruitment mantras is like hire for attitude, because competency you can train and teach and build, but you can't actually fundamentally change people's attitudes to and approaches and styles and things like that. You can sort of mold and shape, but I think the right attitude is just critical. I think sort of the learning in there for me is like you try and recruit people that are smarter than you and specialists in their spaces, but I think have the self-awareness that you're not necessarily the smartest person in the room at that point in time as well. So, and I think that's a good thing because you can't be an expert in all things, brand, commercial ops, finance, what leadership, whatever it may be. So bringing experts in who are better than you is a great thing. And that's actually a sign of a really good leader. I think if you, as a leader, you are unaware of that and you still believe you are the smartest person in the room at times, that can actually be quite detrimental. So, and you'll find that people that work for you, that can be quite challenging for them as well, because maybe they're trying to take you on the journey to get to what is probably the right outcome through kind of lack of knowledge, expertise, or I don't know, just self-awareness. You still believe that your decision is right when actually someone else's view might be, and that can be quite challenging. So I've definitely worked for people where that's challenging, and I've probably been challenging the other way. But I think the self-awareness piece, I think, is quite important. Yeah, hiring for attitudes. You don't always have to be the smartest person in the room, but kind of if you have a broad perspective in those leadership roles to be able to pull in the different aspects because you see a broader picture across the business, you can make a more informed decision, but work with the team that you've got who will give you the insight to be able to make the right informed decision. It's quite important.
Massively. And I suppose there must be some similarities with you playing sport as well, that you're able to perhaps draw into that leadership with, okay, and we need to score more goals. So therefore we look for getting somebody who's a better striker rather than having a centre back trying to be centre forward, for example, or vice versa. Or if a goalkeeper isn't, let's say, Mighty Ducks, Goldberg, he was scared of the puck. If you've got a goalkeeper that's scared of something, it's probably not the best person to have in that position. And he might have the right attitude, but you might just need to put him in a different position to benefit from him a little bit, or
I
them.
totally agree. Yeah, so there's two kind of things that I think have shaped me in that, in the example that you're giving. So one is I played a lot of chess when I was growing up, and actually chess was quite strategic. You're always thinking 3, 4, 5 moves in front of what you're doing and trying to figure out kind of your opponent and what they're going to do. And I think that kind of gives you like strategic like thinking. So, and like problem solving and, all of those sorts of things. So I think that incorporating that into business is something that I've done, and sport for sure. When everybody is trying to create a high performing team that works to the best of their ability, that delivers the best results in sport. What are you trying to do? Exactly that. If you're a striker, you want them to score more goals. If you're a defender, you want them to stop more goals. And so you're trying to, a bit like a chessboard in sport, put people in the right roles, positions that are playing to their strengths, that deliver the best end result for what you're trying to achieve. So you can take lots of those aspects and bring them into the working environment. I think for me, lots of in my sort of more corporate days, because I worked at Coke and Danone and Red Bull and sort of some bigger corporates, they would always talk about like personal development, and they'd always focus on things you weren't very good at, and what are you not very good at, and then can we make you better at those things. And so being that non-conformist, I was like, actually, what are people really good at? And let's focus on the things they're really good at and get them to do more of that rather than things they're not so good at. Because you're more motivated, you enjoy it more. If you're a defender and you're being told you have to score 20 goals a season, you can't score, you're just not going to enjoy it. So I was like, why don't we flip that on its head and actually just focus on where are people really good and what do they really enjoy doing and get them to do more of that. And if you are brilliant in sales and great at negotiating, go and do that. Don't come up with a creative content for a marketing campaign. If you're a creative, go and work in a creative, to just focus on the things you're good at and just do more of that. And I think you get the best from people from doing that and deliver far better results as well.
Yeah, I don't know if you've come across it, but there's the something called Strength Finder, which I
Yep.
think is Gollop's test, and that works on what are your top 5 strengths or what are your top 10 strengths. And actually, once you place that or you realize that, like you say, you enjoy it more. And I've still got one of my hockey coaches always used to say, you've got to earn the right to play the game the way you want to. So that will lead back into a bit of your burnout, that if you're always trying to attack all the time, you're actually leaving you exposed. Or if you're always defending all the time and you're not getting out of up the pitch at all, you're not earning the right to play. But sometimes there's a little bit of give or take. You've got to absorb a little bit of pressure and then know when to press, and vice versa. And I think there's a lot of learning skills that you can have by knowing a little bit more strength, like the Strength Finder stuff, to come into the workplace or even just into your life, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. And listen, on Strength Finders, I've used that multiple times for different teams that I've been a part of, because I think people don't have always that self-awareness of what are they really good at in a working environment, whether you're commercial, strategic, you're a visionary, whatever it might be. And that particular book, anybody listening to this, I'd recommend, if you've never gone through that exercise, go and buy it, go through it yourself, and you understand yourself better, and actually go and buy it for the teams that you work with, because they'll understand that themselves better, and you will know their strengths, so you can then start putting your team into those positions where they do play to their strengths. It's a brilliant book and well worth doing. Yeah, for sure.
And if we move on to sort of the present day, obviously you've had some fantastic corporate life there and opportunities there. What made you start and change path to what you're doing now?
So I've done a lot of things, as you'll have seen, from my sort of LinkedIn background. 20 years food and beverage, primarily beverage companies, a range of started as a field sales rep, and I've all the way up to chief executive. And I've founded my own businesses as well. I think the latter part of my career, I wanted to work for organic, fair trade, sustainability driven, purpose driven organizations that have positive impact, because being a dad of 3, I want my children to look at me at some point and go, okay, you were on this planet for a period of time, but at least the period of time you're on here, you kind of made some and distributed products that were as good as they could be for people, rather than just having a detrimental impact. The latter part of my career, I think the kind of the values sustainability piece like being a dad drove a lot of the decisions. And then it was like health, wellness, kind of some of the things that I was passionate about, myself as well. And then I wanted to work for like brilliant brands. I love brands and I find them fascinating. I find human behavior fascinating. I find why people love brands like super interesting, why they don't like brands as interesting, because the insight that you can generate is phenomenal. I think in food and beverage, taste is single-handedly one of the most important criteria. You can have a fantastic brand, but if your product tastes terrible, they're going to pick it up once, but they're not going to come back again. Taste is, primary driver. But I think, I worked for brands like Liquid Death, and some people may know that brand, some people may not, but it's a brand that was a social first brand launched through the pandemic, and it's now valued at north of 1.2 billion, which is a phenomenal success in a very short period of time. And I was the managing director of the international side of the business. So I was taking that brand into new markets and territories, and the level of creativity behind that brand, it absolutely ripped up the rule book. It removed conventional marketing, and it was like, the more disruptive, the more abrasive, the more funny we can be, the more people will like it or dislike it. But those that dislike it will talk about it as much as those that like it. So then you're not having to spend paid money on media in order to grow awareness in your atypical marketing funnels, with lots of people sharing that content, which meant that it was doing the work for us. So taking some incredible learnings, through different brands like that. And so this latter part, I set up an agency called Uncharted Territory, born in New Zealand, and it's a global brand building agency where we focus on like culture first lifestyle brands that are purpose driven, trying to make a positive impact and disrupt in the categories that they're in. And I absolutely love it. It's a kind of, my career going towards this point has made me I now want to enjoy and love everything that I do. So Uncharted Territory was born, and there's several people in the organization now, and we work with some absolutely incredible brands, and I feel very lucky and fortunate to work on those brands. And we work on a plant-based protein product, which is the world's first canned protein shake out of New Zealand. We work in the functional space. We work with water and hydration. We work with a personal care brand for mothers, which I absolutely love because its mission is really clear. It's about, often mothers lose who they are once they go through kind of sort of fertility, pregnancy, post-pregnancy, and postpartum. And actually, it's about sort of bringing that community back together and actually allowing people to be themselves. The delivery of that product is through skincare and creams and serums and things like that as well. But it's bigger than that. It's about creating movement, supporting a bigger mission. And for us to be able to work on brands like that is just, I feel very privileged and very lucky to do it now. And also very fortunate to be able to add a lot of value back to these brands through the experiences that I've got from being a dinosaur in the industry now, and from what I've done, and it's nice to be able to share those learnings and experiences and help people succeed off the back of things that I've got wrong and the lessons that I've learned, but also the things that have worked really well in the past as well. And all of those things have led me to that point, which I'm very grateful for.
And what was that moment like? Was it that you thought, right, this industry needs a different approach and I'm going to build it because you haven't been able to find that there? Or was there just a gap that you saw from your experience and thought, that's where we need to go and that's what I want to jump on board with?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's a few different reasons. One, I kept getting asked to do like strategic advisory, working with different brands, because I think people saw my experience and were saying this individual's probably got some good lessons and learnings that he can pass on. So I was getting asked to do it quite frequently. I did a bit for a few different industries. I worked in tech and paint and packaging and retail and a few different things, just to kind of grow my experience and knowledge base. So being asked to do it, so kind of the need was there, being asked to do it. So the agency does three things really. It's like strategic advisory, and we invest into brands. We do brand and culture, so like lifestyle marketing, and then we do international expansion. So we take brands that have sort of established in domestic markets and to go into new markets, because I've worked for global organizations in multiple territories now. What I find is the strategic advisory piece tends to be kind of smaller startups that don't have that experience, that are looking for that knowledge. So that's kind of tends to be where the most value can be added there. Lifestyle marketing, I think, is fascinating. So, which I'll come back to in 2 seconds. And then the international expansion is kind of like mid-tier brands that are sort of 15 to 40 million that have gone, okay, I'm established now. I've got past those first few hurdles, and now what I want to do is additional growth in other markets. So that's the kind of area that we aim for. Lifestyle marketing, I think the way that we consume media has changed dramatically in these last 25 years. I mean, those millennials that are listening in, we've done the hard yards of like the internet was created, the dial-up internets, the changes from Nokia phones to, Apple and everything else that we've got now to AI, and it's just been such a rapid transition. And I think the way that people consume media now is totally different to how it used to be. I remember it just being like, TV and newspapers and a bit of radio, and it's so different now, short form content through YouTube, social media platforms now, TikTok, exploration, and even now you've obviously got TikTok Shop, and those things just didn't exist 20 years ago when starting in food and beverage, in 20 years from now, it will be so AI driven in so much of what we do and how we consume things, it will be totally different again. And so that middle pillar for us, that lifestyle marketing, like culturally relevant brands in lifestyle marketing, I believe the best way for brands now to infiltrate like and grow like an authentic fan base is go and find the scenes and the audiences, the people that your product resonate with, and be present with them in key moments as much as you can be. So I'll give you an example. If you're a sock brand, a running brand, and you've got socks that are for runners, you can go and spend loads of money on bus campaigns and TV and radio and things like that, and you might grow your awareness, And so in typical marketing, you've got awareness, consideration, purchase, advocacy, and so you might grow the top line awareness, but you've still got to get people to consider before they buy, and then they continue to buy. So we kind of flip that marketing funnel on its head and say, actually, focus on the bottom end of the funnel, focus on like that core audience. So if you're a sock brand that's for runners, go to the run clubs in the different cities, find the most influential people within those run clubs, get them, so you're in the right scene, you then find the right partners, you associate yourself with other brands that are in that running community, and then you go to lots more events and you're present at them, creating unforgettable moments. And those unforgettable moments where people remember moments and experiences. When you hear a song, it takes you instantly back to a core memory that you've got. So I think lifestyle marketing now is about create those unforgettable moments with the right scenes where your product fits. And actually, the impact that has is a longer term, better advocacy, and you build the funnel the other way up rather than doing awareness down, which I just think is really important. You get big corporates that are fantastic at doing the above the line campaigns, PR, digital media, paid spend, all of those, they're brilliant. Like they don't need any help with that. The bits that they are not so good at is how do I really get this product into the right places with the people, that they're not cool. They are fucking cool. That is who they are. That's just part of what they are. That's part of their lifestyle. So what we do is we try and focus on that area there and help brands and businesses infiltrate those scenes. And I just think that's a different way of approaching marketing now. And I think that is a need. And I think people and brands are still figuring out that need and still trying to do some traditional, media buying techniques to grow brands. But I think that is, I think it's a unique thing that we do. And we've got so many connections with so many different brands, quite a unique proposition, and it works incredibly well. So we've had one brand that we did an event for. It's like cost about £800 and it got 1.2 million views, and we had about 120 people get tattoos of the brand name, and it was a fantastic brand collaboration and partnership. Have one of the brands that we work on have just gone viral through social media, and they've got north of 6 million people on organic post, no paid spend behind it whatsoever. So and that's from like relevant content events, right? Scenes, and the impact can be really, really strong. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of talking about some of the things that you can probably see. Like these are the things that I'm passionate about and I enjoy. It's like I say, I feel very fortunate to be able to do it now.
And if we come back to the very early part where you said about your first job, 125 years, they're a well-oiled machine. If you do something for long enough, you will learn by doing the things that work and things that don't work. And like you say, if the landscape is always changing, the millennials have seen quite a lot of change in the last 25 years. You've got to be on it. You've mentioned brands a few times just recently. What are some of the things that people get wrong about a brand? Because it seems now everybody's sort of starting a brand up. But dare I say, there's having an infatuation to yes, I have a brand, but actually it's just a one-man person behind everything. Or you've then got, like you say, the people that are north of 15 million with a brand. If we look at the Joe Public, what is a brand, and what are some of the things that brands get right and ones that get wrong that they can't expand? So sort of a two-pronged question there.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much we could talk about here. I think one of the fundamental things for me is, are you solving a problem? So, as a certainly in food and beverage, are you solving a problem? So is there a category need for what you're creating? Fundamentally, people don't really need more in their life, so you need to be solving a problem. So if your brand is not solving a problem and solving a category need, actually, unless you are significantly better or your brand strength is so much more powerful, it can be a real uphill battle. So I think I would be thinking like, what's the problem you're trying to solve first and foremost? So if you're a beverage, is there, and you're in functional beverages, what's the function that you're trying to solve? Is it to make people calmer? Is it to try and help them sleep? Is it to try and give them more energy? Is it to improve their gut health? Kind of what problem are you trying to solve? So I think start there. And I think those brands that do really well are solving an issue. Or they are making people aware of an issue, then solving it for them. None of us knew we needed AI. None of us knew we needed improved smartphones, but none of us would cope without an improved smartphone now. They created the demand by telling us there was a problem, and then solving the problems. I think start there. I think the other thing is when entrepreneurs create brands, they can think design, aesthetic, look and feel. I've created a brand because it looks great. That's not a brand. That's just what your brand looks like. So, what your brand looks like is not what your brand stands for. So those are two very different things. Entrepreneurs can go, "Oh, I'll create something that looks great. Oh, maybe I've solved this I'm creating a solution. Oh, now I've got a brand." You go, "Actually, no, that's not a brand. A brand is like, what's your reason to exist and what do you stand for and how are you going to communicate to people and where are you going to communicate to them and what's your point of difference to what's out there already, because why should I as a person buying into a brand, why should I buy your brand over someone else's brand? So you need to have a stance, whatever that stance is. And I think one of the things that I'm a big proponent of is, I think, go and be disruptive, go and be something that other people aren't. Otherwise you just look the same as everybody else. And if you look the same as everybody else, you don't stand out from the crowd. If you don't stand out from the crowd, you can't expect people to find you, love you, pick you up. Like, find your niche, find your audience, find your scene, stand for something, be disruptive in how you look, feel, speak, talk, tone, how you engage with your audience, and like keep doing it time and time and time and time again. I think that's I think too many people just go, "Oh, I've got a nice looking brand now. I've got my brand," and it's, no, you haven't. That's like, you've not even started, and I think it's an important thing for people to think about, is that kind of that journey of that brand as well.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
Coming back to that sport analogy, then it's a bit like standing in the pub saying how great you are, but actually, or even in the change rooms, how great you are. I've played here, done this, 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 and this. But actually, you get on the pitch, and if we use hockey as an example, they can't hit a ball straight or they can't stop a ball. You're like, okay, you might sound really great, but you're not actually showing it. Or you then look maybe the ones who don't really give it large in the change room, but come on the pitch and suddenly go top bins and set up a wonderful pass and just quietly just walk back to the thing, and they go, that guy just stands for playing sport really well and doing a good job. The other one, he talks a load of hot air, and actually he needs to maybe just start on the coach line because he can see something slightly differently.
Yeah. Are you describing when you and I played hockey? Is that what?
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
Or
So
some people we may have played with, yeah, definitely.
yeah. So Ian and I used to play hockey together, just for those that are listening in as well. And no, I hear what you're saying. I think it makes total sense as well.
And I think we were probably, I don't know, 11 or 12 or something like that when we first started playing at that age.
It was,
Very
yeah, a few years ago.
a few years
Got
ago, yeah.
slightly faster, slightly older, a few more greys.
Let's go back into brands then, and obviously you talk about some of the early stages there of also setting up them with sort of strategies, and imagine finance has got to be some of that. And what are some of the things that, or some of the myths that people get wrong about financing a brand? Because we see Dragon's Den, people pitching, you then see people sort of bootstrapping from car boots and market fairs and stuff like that. But what are some of the misconceptions people get wrong that you'd like to put to bed around financing of brands?
I think I'm going to contradict myself slightly here, but quite intentionally. So I think there's a common misconception that people think you need a load of money to start. I can't start anything because it's going to cost me hundreds and hundreds of thousands. Therefore, it's just not possible. So I think dispelling that myth is actually the hardest part, is starting. In anything that you do, the first decision is the hardest. So I think that you don't need hundreds of thousands of pounds or dollars or whatever currency you work in to start something. You need a a vision, a clear mission of what you want to do, solve a need, create a brand. You kind of need to be clear in terms of what you're trying to achieve. What's the goal that you're aiming for? And start. Just don't be afraid to start. Uh, you do need money, so I'm going to contradict myself here. You can't start something with nothing. Not in its entirety. You can actually do a lot of things, especially in today's tech era, that you can create lots of things, without it costing a fortune. Ultimately, in food and beverage, at some stage, you are creating a product, and as you create that product, you have to source ingredients, packaging. You've spent maybe some money on design, aesthetic, and communication. There's some regulatory components, logistics and warehousing, and there's various things that are just going to cost money. And often when you start a brand in this space, you have quite a large outlay in terms of that first production run. It then takes you some time. You spend all the money up front. You get get this product produced. You then you sell it to a customer either through online, through your own website, wherever you retail, whichever channel you just decide to go in. It takes some time to get that cash back into the business. So the financing side of it, one of the single biggest challenges that people face is actually cash flow. So you may have the upfront cash to pay for that initial starting of a brand, but by the time that cash comes back into your business, you've sold all your product and you need the cash to spend it on the next one. If you continue to grow, it just keeps happening and happening and happening, and you need more cash to fund the bigger production, but you've only just sold what you had from the production before. So it's one of the challenges is just managing that cash flow consistently as you go forwards. And most small brands and businesses that are in that kind of startup scale up phase will understand the challenges of that. Saying that, there are ways of financing. There are so many different ways that you can finance. There's funding, loans, there is family and friends, there's angel investors, there's debt financing, is invoice financing. There are so many different ways that you can generate cash to help you, providing your proposition is really strong. So I'd encourage those people that are listening in to go and sort of learn, go and talk to people that have gone through those experiences and understand how you can generate cash in order to fulfill what is your dream. Because you don't need a lot to start, but you will need to manage it appropriately as you go forwards. But there are ways of doing it as well. So, and as you grow, you need, and the bigger you grow, the more money you need. At that point, as time goes on, you can do Series A, B, C, different levels of investment raises as well, and raise different amounts of money. Yeah, so don't let it stop you. Have a bit of a plan, manage that cash flow, go and talk to people that can help you. And there's loads of ways of generating cash, especially if you've got, a good idea as well.
Yeah. And that, I suppose, that then takes it from a flash in the pan brand to something that actually has legs and sustainability to then bridge those gaps. I'd imagine there must be different industries or different sectors, there must be certain brands that must say get to 500,000, 1 million turnover and just can't seem to break it. Then you get maybe a challenger brand come out that might use some lifestyle marketing tactics and suddenly go to 5-6 million, and you're thinking, well, actually that's quite a big jump. Sometimes you're not quite sure, like you were saying, one of your people you work with had 6 million views and customers or something. You're like, well, how do you cope with the influx of those as well? Those are other challenges that brands have with probably sustainably growing with growth as well, isn't it?
Totally, yeah. And it depends on the business model that you put in place. Some people might go, actually, I want to be profitable from very early on and self-fund and use the profit in order to generate kind of the production, which will be one of the single biggest costs, and then infrastructure, team, systems, all that sort of stuff. But I think you can grow profitably, but it will be more sustainable at a slower rate, especially if you don't want a dilution of your equity as you founded your business. There are other ways of doing it, which are you can be non-profitable, raise money, have a negative EBITDA for quite a period of time, but have a path to profitability over time where you'll improve through volume efficiencies. You take out costs out of the business. You know that your gross margin will improve over time because you're getting volume breaks on the ingredients that you're buying. There are so many different ways, but it depends on the business model that you take. And there's no right or wrong. There's just probably speed of growth and commercial sustainability. There's risk in either of those business models. And I've definitely oversimplified it, saying there's two. There's more than two, but in that instance, there's risk associated, but different types of risks. It could be if you grow too slowly, because you're profitable. Actually, someone else comes in with a similar proposition and grows quicker and they take share, and it's too difficult to catch up to them, and your proposition is squashed. It could be actually on the flip side of that, if you grow non-profitably and you take lots of cash and you grow really, really quickly, and then you don't turn to profitability quick enough, that creates a whole other set of challenges as well. So there's different risks and ops, associated with the different models. And I think that would come back to sort of ambitions and plans of brands, founders, those people that are sat around the table that have got a vested interest.
Yeah, and again, it's probably very valuable. The next question would be is obviously if brands come to you, what are the sort of the first 2 or 3 things you look at to whether you can see if a brand can really scale or not? And I think we just touched a little bit on that. But if Joe Bloggs comes with a consumer lifestyle brand or a beverage brand, let's take a functional drink space. If they came to you, what would be the first couple of things you would look at the business with and offer some support with?
Yeah. I think have they got a scalable proposition? So, you take that example, functional drink space, it's one of the quickest growing categories in the beverage sector at the moment, certainly in the UK and probably lots of other markets as well. So you kind of look at the category and go, is the category in growth, and is there an opportunity to continue to grow and scale? So you want to look at some of the macro, the macro impacts and the category impacts. Are they fundamentally solving a problem that isn't already being solved? And if it is already being solved, have they got a differentiated enough proposition that they can disrupt that category, and they've got a slightly different proposition? Maybe it's adding more value in, maybe it is bringing new shoppers in with a slightly different proposition, whatever it is. It's looking at kind of, is it unique, is it differentiated, and have they got a scalable opportunity to grow based on solving that need, but also within that category? I think for me, passionate about brands. I don't love boring brands. I love brands that are there to kind of be disruptive and break the conventional norms. So I personally like working with those brands that are disruptive and non-conventional, because I think they'll cut through, whether you like them or don't like them. I think they'll cut through. I you know I personally look for that as well. I think understanding sort of ambitions, vision, how it's financed, I think is quite important as well, because then we can determine whether is it an investable proposition for us? Do we want to put money into that business? Are they well funded that actually you can have all the ambition in the world, but if you haven't got the financial backing to, reach that ambition, those are two very different things, which comes back to that kind of strategic planning piece. If you haven't got a strategy or a plan, like, let's create one together. Let's make sure you've got a really clear plan on how you're going to do that, because I think it's really important. You don't need to be rigid and absolutely stick to it, because everybody will know in business, best laid plans, never work out. It's kind of degrees of variances within those plans. But if you have no plan or no direction or no goal, or your goal is so far out of reality from where you currently are, just bridging some of those things to get some really sensible business practices in place, I think can actually really help brands succeed. And then the other one for me is I just have a no dicks allowed policy. I just don't want to work with people that I don't want to work with. So, and some people might say the same about me, right? And that's totally fine. I've worked for so many businesses and with so many people now. I want to work with people that I enjoy working with and give me energy and don't suck the living daylights out of me like a Dementor from Harry Potter. I want to have people that I work with that just gives me energy, and we feed off of it, and we can go and you enjoy it so much more. And I think that's what life's about for me now. So those are some of the things that I look for when we're talking to those different brands.
And it's leaving egos at the door.
For sure. Yeah.
Isn't
For sure.
Like you said earlier on in your career, you might think you're the smartest person in the room. If you do think that, you're probably not by a long shot. So you've got to pull yourself up by the bootlaces. And if we go back into, obviously we've played hockey, your career's gone on and you played international hockey. What do you think you've learned from playing at that level of sport that you've been able to bring into brands, bring into businesses, and bring into the mindset? Is it being able to handle pressure or make decisions very quickly, build teammates around you so everybody's got a role and understanding everybody's role? Have there been quite a lot of crossovers from that?
Yeah, for sure. I think there have been. I think one of the things there that sort of stood out to me. So the different teams that I used to be part of, I'd say sort of more often than not, I was sort of the captain of the team. So that kind of leadership principles, probably taking from sport into business, I think has been quite important. So understanding people, individually, understanding their strengths, being able to sort of rally the troops and kind of, set a clear goal and vision and like, when things aren't going well, course correct that, and when things are going well, accelerate it. And so I think that kind of leadership, from sporting leadership into business, I think has been quite helpful. Uh, you know, I don't think it's always been helpful. I think there are times like how you would talk to someone on a sporting field isn't how you talk to someone in a work environment. So not that I've done that, but you need to just kind of take the principles but not the absolutes. So I think that's been pretty helpful. I'd say like pressure early on in my career. Yeah, I think when you're playing, that type of level, and I think at one stage I was played for a club called Wimbledon, they're a very successful hockey club in the UK now, and I was captain in their team. We had 6 or 7 Olympians in the team, and I was probably the worst player of everybody in that team. So you're then leading a team of people that are far better than you. So I think there's quite high pressure there, and puts you out of your comfort zone. So I think like being able to cope with that pressure, I think is something that you learn to do. But I think it is not always the easiest thing to do. And I'd say the latter part of my career, and maybe sort of post burnout stages, I think managing that pressure is hard, and I found it harder now than I did earlier in my career. I think earlier in my career, I just took it in my stride. I think now I'm like, this is quite a high pressure, high intense situation. And sometimes I actually just like push that back and be like, no, that's not okay. So I've had to learn some of those like, no, that's not okay, rather than just absorb it and just roll with the pressure, which maybe comes with maturity, maybe comes through sort of self-awareness, maybe comes through experience, all of those things. Yeah, I'd say yeah, some of.
Yeah, brilliant. And if we, what's some of sort of some of the mistakes that people still make with brands or in leadership that maybe reading leadership books, they couldn't necessarily get from it, but what sort of, when you step into brands or businesses, you see the leadership team sort of making mistakes, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, again, there's so many different places we can go here. Are you talking about leadership specifically, or are
Yeah.
you talking about brands?
More leadership. So the leadership
Okay.
behind a brand, because obviously you might have the founder that you've already
Yeah, yeah.
described that can make a really shiny, glossy thing, but then you need somebody else behind it to give some substance, some strategy, some financial guidance. You might need a creative, you might need a salesperson, that sort of thing, to
Yeah.
be able to bring it all together.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I'd say where I've seen it and it's been successful is like the creative genius behind the brand, because that creates disruption, it creates influence, it creates sort of moments that are unforgettable. It brings communities together and relevant scenes with audiences that resonate with your brand, and it's fulfilling a proposition and a need. I think like that creativity is brilliant. So having a team that can work around that creativity of the brand to bring it to life in the right communication, styles, I think is really important. Like the operational setup, you can be the best visionary in the world, but if operationally you can't cope with it, that is very challenging. So I think I've seen it at points people want to scale and grow beyond a rate that the business can actually cope with, either through operational infrastructure, organizational physics, or like working capital requirements in order to grow the business. So I think just marrying some of those things together, which is sort of, the Instagram versus reality moment, kind of trying to pull those bits together. I think where I've seen it done badly, you touched on it earlier, like ego. When people are successful and continue to be successful, it's a self-fulfilling narrative that you are the smartest person in the room and the decisions that you make work, and therefore I am right. Therefore that reinforces my next decision and my next and so I think where I've seen it be unsuccessful is working with people that can't keep their ego in check, or their personal values influence their work proposition, or or just lack of knowledge, so can slow things down because it's prohibitive, not actually adding value, into a business. Or honestly, at times we all make mistakes. Everybody does it every single day, So sometimes, making mistakes, people do it. It's not necessarily what you do with the mistake, it's what you do afterwards. And have you got that kind of self-awareness, reflection, review bits? And are you prepared to listen to those people around you to then course correct and change what you do? And I think some of the best people that I've worked for and the leaders have been really good listeners, first and foremost, visionaries, but really good listeners, and then actually act on the feedback of the experts that are around them to build and grow. Because you can't be an expert in every field. You can't be. Being a good listener is part of that, and then just not being afraid to make those decisions. So having the confidence in your own ability, but not debilitating confidence that lends itself into arrogance and ego, and then it can, so there's lines in amongst all of this, and you're treading those lines as you go forwards. But I think some of those things are sort of important things to be aware of.
And I imagine sort of almost curiosity has got to play a big part on it, or something just came to me there with the very famous Richard Branson quote. He didn't know the difference between net profit and gross profit. He said, so I just asked, was that good or bad news?
Yep. Yeah. I remember it was a great quote that. Yeah. And I mean, he's a fantastic example of an entrepreneur, isn't he? The left school, no qualifications. He speaks multiple times in his book about almost going bust at different points in time. And his business is failing, but a true visionary. And then at points, now other people run and lead the business, and he's kind of gone from like player coach to manager to being spectator, and he's kind of gone through that journey, if we take that sporting analogy. And as a spectator, maybe the business is working even better now, or maybe he's the chairman of the group or whatever. But sometimes having that recognition to go, when's the right time to take the steps away from what you're doing to bring other people in to do these things that can do them far better, I think is quite an important moment as well, and a life cycle of a business.
And that brings us nicely on to sort of how important is sort of structure, or the work you do now, or the team that you build around, that we can avoid the burnout traps, like you just mentioned, that actually I want to work with nice people that give me energy rather than push it away. What do you think, or how do you structure your work now to balance all of those things?
Yeah. Like taking business, like clear strategic plan, with high prioritization of what's needed to be done. Processes run businesses, as sad as that probably sounds. Like having good processes drive efficiencies. It means that quality checks are in place. It means that people components are being looked after in the right way. Like processes and structure systems run businesses. You don't want it to get to a point where it dampens entrepreneurial flair, I don't think, personally, which you do have in the bigger corporates. There is zero entrepreneurial flair. It's just, like literally zero, maybe negative. Maybe we'll go for a negative, but like in smaller businesses, it's like you want the entrepreneurial flair and the creativity, but you've got no process, system, structure, in place. It can just be like wildfire, and out of control. So you need some of those things in place. And then like people, like we've spoken about it, right people, right roles, playing to strengths, inspired by the vision of what you're trying to create, and getting the best from those people to deliver. And then actually having the hard conversations to correct where it's not working as well. So not being afraid to walk into those difficult discussions and maybe make some changes, because something's not working, or be so rigid in your like strategic direction that you're unwavering from that, because actually course correcting what you do sometimes is no bad thing. If you take Nokia as a great example, I mean, the number one phone brand and company around for so many years, and just absolutely died a death because they refused to innovate and change direction, because they were just heading in one way. BlackBerry, similar sort of thing. You look at some of the brands that have in that space. Apple continue to innovate and change what they do. If you look at Sir Alan Sugar's, was it Amstrad? I think his business wasn't it? Like, I have no idea if that's even around anymore. If you're not innovating and changing what you're doing, I think you will fall behind the times. Having a clear strategic plan is right, but don't plan 10 years down the road. Plan like really solid 12 months. What's your 3-year vision? And just kind of keep correcting after every quarter, so that it keeps evolving and updating as you go. And those are, again, just some important things to be aware of, and some principles that sort of try and work towards.
I think it's like you had Kodak and Fujifilm, and I think when the digital era was coming, Kodak said, no, it's not going to take off. Fuji then realised that half of their ingredients that they used to develop the films were also used in the makeup industry. So they started to diversify into the makeup industry as well. And you think that's quite a pivot from cameras into makeup, but it was pretty much essentially the same raw ingredients.
Absolutely, yeah. I was actually in a pub the other day, and someone was telling me about ITV. I think it was ITV. So apologies if I do get this wrong. Please do fact check me. But I think it was ITV. It's one of the networks anyway. You take the BBC traditional media, where the BBC will continue doing what we do, et cetera, et cetera. ITV, I think they went out and bought like YouTube channels. They went out and bought different platforms. They went out and bought music platforms. They went to multiple different platforms as this new technology era was coming through, rather than just being like, we'll just be traditional TV and that's all we'll do. And they now own so much in the US as a result of the diversification of investments and where they went as a result of those evolving trends. And like consumer behavior trends are changing and they will continue to change. So, and I think AI is probably at the forefront of one of those changes at this point in time. People are still just using Chat GPT and thinking like, that's it, this is the one. Like there are so many others that are so much more advanced right now. And it will continue to evolve and drive efficiencies and change companies and the way that companies work going forwards. So I think if you're listening into this, like, and you're like, oh no, ChatGPT, but not a lot else, I'd be like, get out, go learn, be curious, like you said earlier, go and find out and see where that can take you. And as a brand and a business, how can it help you? People, processes, systems, creativity. What can it do to speed things up and make it work even better for you? So yeah, I think it'll be a fascinating space. 20 years from now, when I'm even more of a dinosaur, what it looks like, then versus what it does now.
Yeah.
I'll probably be so far out of touch. I'll be like, I'll be just be too old. So, but I'm trying to stay in line with those trends, but they're just changing all the time.
Yeah, and where do you think brands are heading over the next couple of years, and what would also separate the brands that survive and the ones that fall by the wayside if we have a look at, say, the next 5 years rather than 25 years?
Yeah. I still think some of the principles that we spoke about earlier will remain. So, macro trends, solving a need, creating disruption, standing out from the crowd, all of the things that we've spoken about already. I think brands will need to continue to do that. I think it'll be the ones that will really accelerate, driven by tech. I think and integrating tech into how they operate on a daily basis to drive efficiencies, speed, level of creativity, improve processes. I think that within the food and beverage industry, I think, that will become more and more apparent. How people market their brands and how people consume media, I think will continue to change. So brands that are at the forefront of making sure that they're relevant in those different mediums, I think it's going to be really important as well. I still believe some of the big macro trends will continue. Health, wellness, sustainability. All those sustainability drops. Post pandemic a little bit because you've got the cost of living crisis that continues to impact everybody. Through inflation. But I think there's a huge opportunity for brands still. And like you say, lots of people can go and create brands, but you just make sure that as you're creating it, you're solving needs and not just for now, but you are thinking that kind of longer term, 5 year, 10 year, 15 year. What does that look like? And just making sure the timing of that is right. 5 years ago, functional beverages didn't exist. They kind of do, or they did in other markets, but not so much in the UK. And they do now, and they're continuing to grow. 15 years ago, no one really knew what a non-alcoholic beer was. Everybody was drinking a lot. Millennial generation certainly were. So, it's those trends are changing. It's just like having a lens on what are those consumer behaviors and changes that are going to happen. And I think, tech can play a really important role for those brands out there to be, at the forefront of some of those trends.
And if we look back and we sort of zoom out a little bit, looking back at everything that you've done with the big brands, the startups, Burnout, what would be sort of one or two lessons that perhaps have taken you the longest to learn, but now feel very obvious?
The longest to learn, but now feel very obvious. I think take your time. I was always so driven to kind of be like ambitious and driven to do it as quickly as I possibly could. If you're building a house and you go brick at a time, you don't go brick at a time, just going one pillar up because the whole thing just will topple, right? You kind of go base layer, next layer, next, and you build the foundations to go up. And I think if you operate at such a speed where you grow so rapidly, you haven't created the foundations around you and the experience around you to lean on those foundations at different points when things are going well or not so well. And I think, yeah, if I had my time again, I would. I'm very fortunate, very grateful, and I have really enjoyed lots of things that I've done in my career. Very lucky that some things have been very successful, and I've got some good learnings where things haven't been. But I think if I had my time again, I think just being a bit more patient and taking a bit more time to build that foundation and infrastructure, I would do. Just you don't have to race. I think maybe that's one of the sporting elements that I took into business, where I was like, I want to go and win the Premier League. So it's like, let's go, and you go for it. Go to business. I was like, okay, I want to go. Let's go. You go for it. And I think actually, successful sporting teams don't just appear and arrive. They build over time. And you've got, is it Wrexham Football Club at the moment who have gone through this journey? Was it 4 promotions in 5 years or whatever it is? They're building, they're building over time. And changing and evolving what you do. So I think just building those foundations and taking a bit more time, I think is really important. So hopefully that gets through. I think being present in what you're doing and recognizing symptoms of operating at a level which isn't sustainable, I think is another one. So, after experiencing burnout, I think it takes you longer to recover from that experience, and the longer term impact can be more detrimental, or sort of that midterm impact maybe. So I think just being more sustainable and being more present in what you're doing, whether it's family, friends, social hobbies, health and wellness, work, just present in what you do, but not doing everything at 100 miles an hour, and then allowing yourself the time to recover so you can continue to operate at a level that's sustainable. The tortoise and the hare, it's just that kind of analogy of like getting it right, over time. So I think those two things are pretty important. I think I've probably covered a range of other learnings throughout this podcast, so but maybe I'll leave it on those two for people to pontificate over.
Perfect. And what's the next chapter for you in uncharted territory? What are you sort of building, or what are you allowed to say publicly that perhaps that would inspire people that you're going to grow with it?
Yeah. So we spoke a bit earlier about financing brands. Um, a very, I come from a working class family, then, and everything that I have, I've worked hard for to deliver. I've sort of worked through a career, with varying degrees of success, and founded uncharted territory. And like I say, we've got these three pillars, lifestyle marketing, like for culturally relevant brands, international expansion, and like the strategic advisory. Created that agency and platform. It didn't cost me a lot to create it at all. Setting up a bank account through a tech-based bank account, building a website, it's not too difficult. I use a platform called Pitch, which is brilliant for, decks and visuals and things like that. And then I go out as a service-based proposition, charging money and testing and learning different things. That's now funding the vehicle. Off the back of that, I've got my own brands that I've now created. One of those brands is called Brose, which is rosé for the boys, and it's called it's called Brose because there's a stigmatism around men's mental health, still, and it's so important. It's one of the biggest causes for suicide in young males. There's a high pressure on young males to kind of, be this provider, not cry, not show emotion. It's still there. And so Brose was three of us, three mates, and we're all around a table, like quite drunk. And, we started talking openly. And it's like, why did it take us this long to get to this point? We're having a glass of rosé, and it's like, oh, bro's having a rosé, Brose. We're like, okay, so the serious undertone is about like men's mental health and getting men to talk, but the delivery proposition is about community and guys coming together at moments that give them happiness. So, the uncharted territory, help being a service proposition and helping brands to now creating our own brands, to now we invest in other people's brands. And, that's come from nothing. It's not cost a lot of money to do that. And it's exciting because I'm excited. I've got loads of energy to, go and take that and grow it to, something new and see where it can go. And there'll be stuff I'll get wrong, and the team will get wrong. There'll be stuff we'll get right. But like, I'm going to enjoy it. And for me now, at the stage that I'm at with my career, I want to enjoy the work that I do, work with people I want to, take uncharted territory to work with these brands and help them grow and scale. And like it excites me and it gives me that passion. Part of that passion is as an agency, we'll give back as well, not just through Brose and the community that I'm talking about there, but we're setting up a charity that looks after seagrass. So I don't know if you know this, but seagrass covers about 0.1% of the planet, but it takes in about 10% of the ocean's carbon. So actually, the agency will now start donating back to supporting that charity. We should probably create our own one, but there's a few that we're looking at. One's actually off the west coast of Portugal, because if it's removing carbon from the planet, it's adding value and purpose to everyone and future generations. So I feel happy about that, going back to my kind of, three boys, want them to look at me at some point, in the future and go, I was around for a bit and did all right, and some parts I've done well as a dad and other parts, I haven't. But like, if I can do that and give back and have this place where I can incubate and grow new brands and add value to other brands, and I'm passionate about it. I enjoy it, and I think that's a good starting point for people. So That's where I see it going to next.
Which is a bit like being from the player of your sporting analogy to player coach to manager, now almost like franchise owner, where you can go and get the right managers in place, the right team in place and nurture them. But as I think it was a Little Britain, write the theme tune, sing the theme tune, perform the theme tune. Once you've done all of those, you then know what sounds about right and some energy that might need to be put into them.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting. I'm really looking forward to the future, and yeah, just passionate about what could happen next, and really enjoying it, which I think is, yeah, it's a good sign for me.
Yeah. Well, if you're passionate about, I think enthusiasm is one of the most easily transferable emotions that you can put onto somebody that they will then feel enthused with it as well or feel motivated.
Yeah.
Why would you not just give somebody a little pot of joy or a little bit of happiness, you know?
Yep, totally.
But no. But from learning the ropes of the big brands to leading in a way that reflects values and your experience, it's been brilliant hearing your journey, the wins, the mistakes, and the mindset behind all of it. But thank you for taking us through your journey, and thank you for coming on 360 Life Stories.
Thanks very much for having me. Really appreciate it, and nice to talk, and nice to see you off the hockey pitch after all these years. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant.
Very good. Thanks.